Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. I'm your host, Julia, a PT turned product professional, joined by my delightful partner in crime co-hosts, Emma.
This is my tribe. This is how I think.
And Emily.
That is the best getting into PT story I've ever heard.
Founders of the Clinician Transition. Each episode, we interview former rehab professionals who have leveraged their clinical skills into non-traditional roles. I invite you to come hear the journeys, follow the career paths, and learn about the opportunities beyond these clinic walls. On today's episode of Beyond These Clinic Walls, we're joined with Raad Shebib. Raad is a seasoned product management professional with a distinguished career in digital healthcare after working as a doctor of physical therapy in both the inpatient and outpatient settings.
That is why I feel clinicians or the clinician transition are very well set up to be spectacular contributors in the product management space.
As a product manager, they have led the development and optimization of service tools to enhance healthcare delivery, streamlining patient scheduling, engagement, and clinical information flows. Raad has executed product roadmaps at some of the top consumer brands, ranging from wearable sensors to fitness AI. Raad has collaborated with clinical teams to co-create innovative solutions, fostering healthy behavioral changes in users, emphasizing empathy, diversity, and inclusion in product design. With a track record of driving innovation and delivering exceptional results, Raad continues to shape the future of healthcare technology. Buckle in, because if I do say so myself, this is a pretty rad episode. Happy listening. Raad, I was also going to ask, have you been on any other podcast before?
This is my first.
Oh, what an honor. So exciting. Oh my gosh, no pressure. Okay, gotta be good. Well, welcome to our podcast. And thank you for being here. This is awesome. I'm biasedly super excited to have you on the show today. You were one of the first people in the space and kind of mentors that helped me with product management when I was just a rough and tumbly little clinician trying to do her best in the world. You helped me in so many different ways. So I'm so excited to have you here today.
Bonjour, salam. It's very nice to be here. I'm very humbled by everything you just shared. And I've been watching your career development with excitement from far away and will continue to do so. So thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so the first question I ask all of our guests, we're going to dive into everything, but give us high level a little bit about you and your career journey, kind of what your role is now.
As of this recording, I've been working as a product manager or in product adjacent roles for the past 7 years, primarily in healthcare technology. Before that, I was a practicing physical therapist, though one could argue that I've been practicing as a clinician this entire time, given how much subject matter expertise and transferable skills have benefited me in my product roles.
You're a product manager now. You're a fully product manager. You have a lot of wisdom to share, which I'm excited to dive into deeper on. Maybe to kick it off, and I think I put this question on here, the 3 things, because you always give advice in buckets of 3, and I love that. And I think you should make a coffee table book that's Raad's advice of 3s, and it's just Raad's advice in 3 pieces. My first question on here was what are the first 3 things someone should do when they accept a non-traditional role?
The best way to approach this answer, I feel, is to give you 3 things that span your first 90 days in the role. The first 30 is about learning. You need to look before you leap. So this is really about listening and asking questions and avoiding the strong temptation to make major changes right away. The biggest mistake you can do is actually happens before the first 30 days, which is not taking a break between your clinical role and this new non-clinical role. You really need that reset. I made that mistake myself and learned the hard way. But in addition to that, in that first 90 days, once it starts, after day 1 of being in your new role, the biggest mistake you can make is to jump into a company that has a long history of context and learnings and baggage and act like Dr. Know-It-All. There's this impulse of wanting to make major changes right away when really, like I said, you need to look before you leap. So in the first 30 days, you're onboarding, you're learning processes and tools, you're understanding teams, their current plans and needs, you're shadowing an onboarding buddy, having weekly one-on-ones with your managers and meeting others who you'll be directly working with. Here, you really want to become an expert on the customers and on the product. You want to join sales calls and user research sessions, make allies with people who are closest to the customer, read customer support tickets to understand their pain points, use the product itself, and document your first impressions. In the first 30 days, you're also getting familiar with all the metrics that are most important to the company and also important to your team and product area. By the end of the first 30 days, your deliverable should demonstrate your learning. It should be small and simple, really show the effort that you're putting into absorbing all the information you need to be successful in your role. So, for example, in my last job, I delivered a synthesis and summary of my first impressions of the product and how those impressions might impact the product that I was hired to build. This gave my manager two things. It validated some of the hypotheses that he had been exploring regarding the product that I was set to build, and also introduced new hypotheses that he didn't have the expertise to consider. Other product managers, this kind of first 30-day deliverable could be running a small A/B test, which again demonstrates learning. Item number 2, going to day 60. This is about building trust and credibility, which you've already gotten a head start on because you spent the first 30 days listening. You've given nobody a reason to distrust you because you're quiet, you were listening, you were maybe asking questions, but that was about it in the first 30 days. So going into day 60, you are running execution and either creating a roadmap or running one that you were hired to execute against. You should be on your way to your next deliverable, and ideally that's a quick win. Often that looks like addressing some grunt work that the team is struggling to get to or just doesn't have the bandwidth to address. But because it's your first 60 days, you have the bandwidth and the time to address it, and that's going to really instill trust and credibility within your team. I'd also recommend in the first 60 days between day 30 and day 60 that you reverse shadowing now. So you're taking more ownership of your role, and so you can invite your onboarding buddy to join and to give you insight and from the observations they're making while they're shadowing you.
Wait, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like your onboarding buddy?
Yeah.
So like someone you might have joined with, you're saying?
Ideally, this is somebody who had joined before you started, who's a little bit more familiar with the lay of the land. You've met them in your first 30 days. You identified that they could be a strong ally for you. You probably also shadowed them in your first 30 days. Once day 30 happens and you're going from day 30 to day 60, and it's time for you to take more ownership, if you haven't already, now you can flip the tables and invite them to shadow you, not for them to learn anything new. They could learn some new things, but mainly so that they can start giving you feedback about how you're plugging into the product and the team. So this is ideally an established person. Yeah. Who's becoming an ally for you. You need to see them as an ally and a peer. Often we treat people who should be our allies more as mentors, and I think that can rob us of trusting ourselves when we start a role.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think we'll get more into that when we talk about imposter syndrome. But yeah, I'll give you the nugget here, which is when we put our positions often seeking more guidance than seeing relatedness, then we're putting ourselves in a position where we're demonstrating that we don't trust ourselves and our expertise and our experience. When we seek relatedness with a peer and an ally, this is how I'm thinking of doing things. What do you think based on your experience? And they can offer from their experience and their learnings, the insight that they have. Then it becomes you are relating to an ally and a peer, and you're growing together. They see you as a colleague.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm excited to learn more about that later.
In my opinion, that vulnerability is necessary in creating trust. I'll finish off with the third. You're between day 60 and day 90. Now you're leading independently. You're fully owning your role. You should, at this point, be on your way to delivering your first few results that are really pushing your team's key success metrics. At this stage, even though you have that independence and ownership, You should not be shutting people down. This is really the yes and stage, and that yes and stage should persist for the remainder of your tenure at this company. In addition to that, this is about having strong opinions that are loosely held. You should feel confident to form and express opinions, but keep channels open for people to ask questions and push back, because that's where creative tension comes about, and that's what leads to innovation and delivering value.
I wrote a note the first 30 days when you're kind of entering and you're building this trust. I saw a really nice post the other day is like, you want to lead through evolution, not revolution. And I thought that was a really nice way of putting it, because you are kind of in this observational page, you're building trust, and you're kind of taking a humble back seat to really get that context and historical, background of the company. I really liked how you put all of that.
I want to yes and what you just shared by saying that the first 90 days are really about leading with curiosity, and following your curiosity is going to be how we close the loop on this podcast. It'll be kind of the final pieces of advice that I give at the end. But really, when you lead with curiosity instead of criticism or judgment, you can get really far with how much you deliver in the first 90 days of any role.
I was just going to ask, like you mentioned that first project that you had where you were writing down your first impressions of something and kind of giving that initial feedback. So how did you deliver that in a curious versus critical way?
Oh, I love this question. My response to that really comes down to the power of questions that start with, how might we? When documenting my first impressions, there were objective observations, literally what was happening. There was the subjective observations of how it made me feel or react, or how I would envision potential users responding. And then finally, instead of a criticism at the end, the third thing that I made note of was an open-ended question that was led with my own curiosity that started with, how might we? So an example here would be a product that I experienced that might not have been set up in a way that been the most user-friendly for someone with a disability. Instead of criticizing, I got curious about, okay, how might we adapt this particular feature or functionality for somebody who has only one functional shoulder?
I like that a lot. And Emma, I think an episode or two back, you mentioned like, don't lead with the why, because that puts people on defense, and saying like, how might we is like, hey, how as we as a team? It just changes it from you versus me versus us against the problem. And I think that's brilliant.
I've already mentioned you don't want to start as Dr. Know-It-All. That said, there are things that I was surprised by that you should also kind of embrace and enjoy as a newly minted non-clinical clinician. First, the autonomy that this role brings. I like to say, as a joke, I was not expecting that I could use the restroom whenever I needed to.
That's my joke too.
Transition. Yeah. It's true. Like when you realize, like, oh, I don't have to pray for a patient to be late in order to go to the bathroom. Jokes aside, there's somewhat of a kind of a lack of structure or bureaucracy that innately happens in hospital and clinical systems. It's very refreshing, and it opens up room for creativity and autonomy that we as clinicians aren't maybe accustomed to. It was really wild to me initially to work with people who were not litigious and were open-minded to brainstorming and testing out new ideas. There's still no shortage of regulatory considerations in the healthcare technology space that we have to consider once we start these non-clinical roles. But even within those constraints, a lot of creativity can come about. And my advice is for clinicians to have fun with it, explore it, push the limits on it, even just for the sake of brainstorming. I think it'll make you a much more respected and fun contributor to collaborate with when you're collaborating with product managers, UX designers, data analysts, etc. If you are coming in a more, we'll say, consult type of role as a clinician in a non-clinical role.
Yeah, when I first started looking at product, I felt like the big focus and takeaways was like, you're the voice of the customer, the customer, the customer, which is very true and they should be at the forefront. But I think my focus there took away from all the relationships that you have to build internally, being able to like collaborate with people in creative ways. That was all stuff that until I think you're in it, then you really realize how that happens. Do you have any techniques that you like to use to build some team collaboration efforts, especially being in remote environments?
In a way, this question sort of zooms into that first 30 days or first 30 to 60 days. When I look back at previous roles and how I developed allies, I asked myself, who at this company is going to be in my cabinet? You can get a signal to who that might be from the interview process, even long before you start the role. In my past few roles, which were remote, I followed my gut and my curiosity to identify the one person who's going to be the key to everyone else. Someone who has a bird's eye view of the company, somebody who has a lot of history and context of the company. This is not hard to find at a startup where many of the people that you meet were part of the first 20 to 50 people to join the company or the team or the org. Are plenty of people who wear many hats too. You can find that often. I'll give some examples. Program managers, because they are so cross-functional in their role, they often have that bird's eye view that I mentioned. And so for me, step one often is identifying that person, building a relationship with them, and posing the question, who would you say are the top 10 to 20 people I should get to know, who has a perspective on a different side of the company that will benefit me in as a product manager or whatever role I happen to be in. I think you were asking about like activities to create relationships and bond. I would say even before that, you kind of have to do your homework and learn about who are the people you should be putting in effort to build those bonds with. You have to create individual relationships before you create group dynamics. Individually, one-on-one coffee, the introduction email or Slack for that. Say who you are, how your role might relate to their role. Give them a reason to care, because at the end of the day, they're very busy. Then in the one-on-one coffee, that is all about following your curiosity. It is not about having an agenda. It is of pure curiosity. What is your role? What keeps you up at night? Who are you? And then in terms of group activities, always, no one will say no to a group ideation or brainstorm where they can, in a safe place, share their perspectives on the product or solutions they've been thinking about or customer problems. Any group activity that involves creativity and autonomy and psychological safety for people to share input in a non-pressureful way, always, in my opinion, provides two things: connection, but also allows you to see how group dynamics play out and how to play to the strengths of everybody else in the group.
It's just one of those times where I'm sitting here in awe because you asked Raad that question. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I got a really good answer for this. I did all this stuff at my company. Like, we do all this fun stuff. But Raad's answers are always so strategic. Even the advice of having a call without an agenda, there's still kind of an agenda there, That's one of the reasons he's been so successful, is that strategic thinking at, I would say, all times. Anyways.
Well, I'm blushing. The listeners can't see this, but I'm blushing because Emma's revealing my cards in a way.
I think I've never experienced imposter syndrome quite like I have until I got into a product role. Can you talk a little bit about some imposter syndrome that you've experienced and how you've dealt with it? And does it ever go away?
I'll start with my current perspective on imposter syndrome, and then I'll get into actionable ways to manage it, maybe with some examples. Imposter syndrome is not a diagnosis. Many entities out there have capitalized on this term. It does not exist in the DSM-5. So as a clinician, I have stopped acknowledging that term or giving it power. That said, though, it's still valid, right? So that's not to say that the feelings we associate with imposter syndrome aren't real. Feeling anxiety is real. Feeling challenged is real. Feeling unworthy is real. And all those feelings lead to this constellation of behaviors that we associate with imposter syndrome. So avoidance or expressing self-doubt, accepting failure before giving yourself a chance to even try the thing that's challenging you. So these are the two mantras that I tell myself. One is that feelings are requests. They're not declarations of who I am or who I am not, right? So if I'm feeling if I have this feeling of anxiety around delivering a product roadmap, that's not a declaration that I'm not a product manager. That is just a request for me to look into. Mantra number 2 is that feelings are invitations to find the support you need. So in the example I just listed, I'm feeling anxiety about delivering this product roadmap. I really need to ask myself, what kind of support do I need in order to deliver this product roadmap? Something to think about for the clinicians out there that are feeling imposter syndrome in their non-clinical roles is that none of us was born a clinician. Within the structure of clinical training and our clinical walls, so to speak, we have access to the support we need. We have professors, we have mentors. When we join a clinic or hospital, there's no shortage of clinicians who can support us. The only difference once you go into a non-clinical role is that these companies, these corporations, these startups, they don't really have a structure for us to get that support. There's no startup continuing education platform like MedBridge that will teach you product analytics or how to develop a product roadmap or how to present a pitch to the C-suite of your sexy consumer product. So we need to seek that support out ourselves. So I'll go back to those first two mantras again. One is that feelings, again, are requests. They're not declarations of who we are or who we are not. And 2, that feelings are invitations for us to find the support that we need. It is inevitable that when you first start a new skill that you are not inherently good at, your barometer is going to be in the red zone, telling you this is not for you. And with time and practice and a lot of discomfort, you will, and addressing those needs, right? Like I said, like feelings are invitations, feelings are requests. Addressing those requests and invitations, that barometer will kind of over time go into the green.
Stabilize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the yellow, but not as well.
Maybe the yellow. I mean, is it a career if you're not consistently somewhere in the yellow or like somewhere between green and
right.
yellow?
There should always be a few reds, a little yellow, maybe 1 or 2 greens, right? Yeah, that's where you know. Can you give us like an overview of what is a product manager? What is a product person?
I can summarize the 3 things that a product manager needs to deliver.
Perfect.
You need to be, if you are hoping to enter product management, you need to be able to demonstrate what you can deliver and that you can deliver these 3 things to any company or hiring manager. And they are, drum roll. 1, you need to be able to identify, prioritize, and choose the right problems to go after. 2, you need to define what success looks like. And 3, you need to guide your team or yourself to that success. So, for example, the way to demonstrate those 3 deliverables in a side project or a case study for a company that you're interviewing for. 1, you need to show that you studied and learned what problems need to be solved and provide your rationale for which problem you'd prioritize. Let's say your colleagues are complaining about patients being no-shows to their telehealth appointments. How did you pick the target customer? How did you identify their top pain points? What data did you look at? Did you survey them, ask them more questions, get a little bit more qualitative information? Did you validate any of what they were saying or any of your hypotheses or any of the data with what exists in the literature or what's been studied before? This is an opportunity to show your empathy for your customer. Number 2, you need to define success, right? So that looks like setting success metrics. So in our example, what is the current baseline of patient no-shows? What % do you want to decrease the no-show rate for you to be successful? I'd be even more impressed if I were a hiring manager if you looked at how much potential revenue your clinic is losing due to the no-shows, and you identified the percent that you need to decrease the no-shows in order to break even. And then number 3, this is all about guiding yourself or your team to success. So that can look like creating an actionable roadmap that would lead this hypothetical team to success. How would you ideate on solutions? What are your constraints? What are the risks? How would you pilot or test solutions to validate them? What were your findings? What would your launch plan look like? Who needs to be involved at every step? As a product manager, you need to identify, prioritize, and choose the right problems to go after, define what success looks like, and then guide yourself and your team to that success.
What drew me to product, and then as I'm in it now, everything that you're just saying there parallels so well with patient-facing care and like a treatment plan when having a patient come in and you're going through, think of like the pieces of a SOAP note. Subjective, objective, create a hypothesis. What's your plan going to be? Sometimes when I'd say, oh gosh, this new problem that I'm facing, I don't know how to start or go about it, I kind of am always defaulting back to that clinical decision making and that planning out, because that's pretty much what you kind of just said with some different lingo in there for the product space.
You remind me of 2 things. One, there's a book called Range that came out in the past few years that essentially its thesis is that the greatest innovators in any space are the ones who are generalists and are able to distill concepts and common conventions from one field or space to be novel ideas in a new space. And that is why I feel clinicians, or we'll say, the clinician transition, those types of candidates are very well set up to be spectacular contributors in the product management space.
Well, there's no college program for product. To get into it, a lot of times I feel like it's, at least in the tech space, it's a senior engineer who's taking role as the tech lead and then eventually into the product manager role. And they can kind of come from anywhere, but it's really like hard to get into it. Do you have any suggestions for people where they could start or what to build up their resume to move in that direction?
Yeah, I'll share that there are 3 tiers that you as a clinician could have within product management. This actually, in my opinion, applies to any listener who's interested in UX design, customer success, data analytics, or any other product adjacent type of role. Just replace the term product manager with the role that you're interested in as I, as I kind of walk us through it. So tier 1, consultant role. So this generally looks like a product adjacent role where most of your contribution is directly tied to your clinical expertise and background. So if you are applying for a role like that, your resume needs to demonstrate that you are able to offer advice or consulting at various stages of the product development cycle to help them inform decisions. You can be brought on to help with ideation and surface risks. You can be brought on halfway through the product development process to test potential solutions. And you can be brought on at the end to surface any final risks before launch. Tier 2 would be more about you owning your subject matter expertise, but also being responsible for training yourself around the technical skills that are needed for the role. So in this, as an example for tier 2, you could be a product manager who has been hired because of your subject matter expertise. The hiring manager in the company feels like will be more successful if they hire someone who has expertise and lived experience, even if you don't necessarily have the abundant technical experience that the role calls for. Clinicians are great for this tier 2 because product management is all about, it's all about a lot of things. But one of the things it's about is surfacing hypotheses and then quickly de-risking them, quickly validating them. So someone with a clinical background coming on as a product manager for a clinical product, their mind is already full of many, many hypotheses, and the ability to quickly prioritize which ones are most high risk and need to be tested, and which ones are low risk and maybe don't need as many resources to de-risk or validate. So you might not be the most experienced product manager if you come into a more tier 2 role, but because of your expertise, the company, the hiring manager, they'll be willing to take you on and train you up to be an effective product manager. So at the end of the day, you are responsible for learning the art and science of product management, and your manager is accountable for your success because they are giving you the support you need to learn to become a product manager. Tier 3, this is, I think, Jules, you said it at the earlier part of the podcast, is that I am me, Raad Shebib. I am a product manager. This is where you are fully accountable for the product. You are a full-fledged product manager. You will not be trained on how to do product management, and you'll demonstrate success as someone with the title of product manager, and any type of clinical background is a bonus that could be leveraged. I'd say tier 3 is maybe the most difficult for any clinician to jump into straight from the clinical world. They kind of have to spend a little bit of time in a tier 1 or tier 2 role before they get to tier 3. And their resume, if they're hoping to get into a tier 3 role, their resume needs to demonstrate that they've had experience in the tier 1 and tier 2 level. The example of this is my current role, which has nothing to do with physical therapy. It's still a healthcare product with elements of telehealth and prescription medication. So I'm fully accountable for this product, and my manager expects me to be shipping product from day one, make sound decisions, and eventually mentor and manage others in the art and science of product management. And my experience as a clinician will come up as I develop tools to support the product's clinical operations and processes, but it is not the primary thing I'm bringing to the table. It's just a bonus.
I'm sorry. That was beautiful, and I kind of got lost in it in your response, but
I can summarize real quick.
yeah, so please summarize away.
Bite. So to summarize, tier 1, you are a clinician who's consulting on the product. Tier 2, you could be a product manager, but you're mainly leveraging your subject matter expertise while learning product management. And tier 3, you are a full-fledged product manager who happens to have a clinical background. That's a bonus to your job.
I feel like I'm at 2.5. That's the level I'm at right now. We're getting there.
And you're going to keep growing and feeling the feelings
Yeah.
of anxiety and
My barometer is Yeah, Raad, tell us a little bit about what certifications, classes, courses are necessary to be a product manager, or maybe be a successful product manager. That's probably a little bit of a distinction there.
That's one of the most common questions we get, I'm sure. I've done the certifications. I've had product manager coaches. I've read so many books and taken so many online courses. Those made me good at interviews and got me a foot in the door. But without exception, the hiring manager during interviews could always see past that veneer and call out that I didn't have the necessary experience that they were asking for. They did that by asking for real-life examples that only someone with experience performing product management or product management types of activities would have done. So I feel you need to think about your previous roles as products. If you're a clinician, think about your previous role as a clinician and what services you provided, flip those into products, and then be able to speak to the product management competencies that those products demonstrate. I'll expand on that. There are so many different product management competencies out there. Every article has a different list. Every book claims different things, but it boils down to problem solving, execution, strategy, leadership, and interpersonal intelligence. If you are a clinician looking to break into product management and you are being asked questions that assess your competence in any of these 5 things, you have likely examples around problem solving in your clinical role that demonstrates looking at problems and coming up with solutions that were key to the success of your clients and the business. When it came to execution, you have examples of delivering certain outcomes quickly and effectively. When it comes to strategy, you have examples of how you've set direction and made long-term impact on your clinic. When it comes to leadership, demonstrated the ability to improve processes and collaborate. And when it comes to interpersonal intelligence, you have examples of showing empathy to a client, a provider, a manager, empowering others, managing conflict. And if I went through this list and you're scratching your head saying, I don't think I have examples, there's an opportunity for you to create those examples for yourself in your work. I worked with a spectacular physical therapist once upon a time who identified inefficiencies, our EMR system and our handoffs. And despite a lot of pushback and friction from her managers, she was able to get buy-in from her colleagues, identifying it as a pain point, getting advocacy for us to rethink how and restructure our EMR and our handoff approaches. She piloted it just like a product manager would. She set success metrics and she ended up rolling it out. This physical therapist was Emma Brady, by the way.
No, I'm the one blushing.
But she demonstrated those 5 competencies that I just mentioned. You, as a listener who is a clinician, it might not be an ineffective EMR. I know how much all of us struggle with EMRs, but there could be pain points in your clinic or in certain processes where, again, you can demonstrate these 5 competencies. I didn't answer your question. You said, where are the certifications? I was like,
You're like, no certifications. You got to look for it on your own. No, you did answer it. That was good.
Literally, nobody has ever cared that I had a certification or read certain.
Yeah, for me, I think it was like what you said. It helps you familiarize yourself with the correct jargon. You're able to hold yourself in an interview. Yeah, it's one thing to learn it out of a textbook and then another to apply it real live and have examples to back it up. So yeah, I totally hear you on that.
And I would say, why not think of it in reverse? Instead of saying, what certification should I start with? How about, okay, what competencies do I need to demonstrate? Which one of these books or certifications are going to give me the inspiration to pursue those competencies in my current work or in a side project?
Do you want to give us a little elevator pitch for your show and tell and what our listeners can expect and where they can go right now to learn a little bit more about you and your show and tell?
So for my show and tell, I've been really getting into content creation as a product manager. It's really helpful to building a personal brand and also tricking the algorithm into getting recruiters and hiring managers to find you. So I highly recommend it. That said, I'll be releasing a LinkedIn article that will drop at the same time that this podcast drops, and it'll really cover 3 things. One is about practicing those 3 product deliverables that I mentioned. So that's identifying and prioritizing problems to solve, defining success metrics, and creating a roadmap to get you and your team to success. The second big topic it'll cover is how to craft a career where you're demonstrating the 5 product management competencies that we shared. So that's problem solving, execution, strategy, leadership, and interpersonal intelligence. And really what underscores this entire LinkedIn article is the importance of following your curiosities. Because at the end of the day, we as humans need to not run away from what doesn't make us happy. We're more successful when we walk gently towards what we feel is more aligned with what we want. Many of us feel like we need to run away from the clinical environment. There's burnout, there's compensation isn't ideal, etc. But what I found is when you gently walk towards what success looks like for you in your life with curiosity, not only do you get to where you want to ultimately end up, but you also learn a lot of what we've shared in this article when it comes to deliverables and competencies organically and naturally and joyfully along the way.
Beautiful. And your coffee table book is going to now be titled Leading with Curiosity, because I think that's been the theme of this. And I will be the first one to get an autograph signature on it.
And can it be 3 things to
Yes, please.
Following your personality, 3 bullet points.
I love it. Yeah, that's it. Every page is just 3 bullet points. It's very like design beautiful, and it's just, yeah, I can see it now on my coffee table.
Yeah, so thank you, Raad, for being here. I get excited for all our guests, but you in particular were someone I was so excited to have on here. It's truly a full circle moment. I won't get into all of the details, but to sum it up, I would not be here without Raad. That, without a doubt, is the case. And then the work that I've done with the TCT, that's been such a huge ripple effect. So what you do and the knowledge you share really matters. So thank you. You've given so much to me personally, this community, and beyond. What can us on the call or our listeners do in return for you?
I was not expecting that question. Let me think about it. Yeah, you know what you can do?
3 things.
No, not 3. Oh golly. This condition is not easy. And the thing you can do for me, if I have paved the way in any way, as Emma has inferred, is to keep persisting and never give up. Because if you, Emma, in your example, see me as someone who's been very formative in you and others' career transitions, I will be the first to admit that I have experienced some of the most challenging hurdles and obstacles in my own personal transition and have almost given up. I even hung on to a per diem physical therapy role out of fear of failing in my transition. And if I had given up, I wouldn't be where I am right now, and I wouldn't be on this podcast sharing these insights. Just
never give up and lead with curiosity. I love it.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on this, Raad. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of Beyond These Clinic Walls podcast. As always, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Beyond These Clinic Walls for all the latest updates and episode releases. Make sure to join the Clinician Transition group on LinkedIn and Slack to be part of the networking community for like-minded rehab professionals. Questions, comments, concerns, or do you know someone who might make an excellent guest on our next show? Reach out to us at beyondtheseclinicwalls@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.